we're going to have you guys share the top 3 words that come to mind when you all think about the Omaha Jewish community. And I'm going to have Susie give us her 3 words that she thinks about when she thinks about either Omaha or the Jewish community. Well, you guys are all answering in the chat.
The first, let's see. When I think about the Jewish community or Omaha?
Or Omaha.
Home. I guess, community is part of it, family. And I think a special community and a warmth. And I think home is the biggest one.
Okay, thank you. I can't see the chat, but I hope you all are participating. So they are. Okay, awesome. So this group is a group of under 45 leaders, volunteers, just young people in our community. So we're going to talk a little bit about philanthropy and leadership. So can you tell us about your personal philanthropic journey?
Sure, I can try. I guess it's not something that I think about consciously. It's just sort of something that happens and has happened. It was a part of my life growing up. It was very important. It just sort of was. As I like to say, it was part of the conversation around the Sunday night dinner table. And my parents were the greatest leaders in that, and they were just, and our grandparents also. I'm trying to think where I even started and where I've ended up in philanthropy, but I was always on the what I would consider quite liberal, and was always sort of fighting for what I felt to be the underdog and people who needed strength and help. And I guess I really haven't thought consciously much about what it is and what I'm doing yet.
Do you remember your parents talking about it in kind of a tangible way, or was it more through their actions?
It was more doing. It was more doing, and it wasn't even until we were young adults and things in our lives changed. It wasn't ever really a discussion about how it was, but it was doing. It was doing everything. It was doing from things in the Jewish community to my mom was the world's greatest volunteer in the museum, and I don't know if you guys remember when a man who had spent time in Omaha, his name was Billy Shore, started Share Our Strength. We were involved in Share Our Strength, which is now No Kid Hungry. Before it just was, and there were never rules. It was a tzedakah box, of course, and it was important, but it was just part of our growing up and our, I would say, value system.
What about college or post-college? Do you feel like you were philanthropic and involved at that point in your life? Because I feel like at post-college, I sort of kind of dropped involvement and was thinking about different things. But how was it for you?
Well, I definitely wasn't that involved in college. I was much more involved in supporting bars in college in New Orleans and restaurants, and trying to get through college while I was doing all that. After college, yes, I became very involved in the Jewish community and the Jewish Federation. When I came back to Omaha, was heavily involved in the Jewish Federation, was heavily involved in equality issues. That was sort of where I started after college.
What do you think drew you to get involved or stay involved in the Jewish Federation as a young adult, and to sort of get involved at that point in your life?
Well, that's an interesting question, because part of it was an obligation to be involved in the Jewish community. It was, I was following a long line of those before me who had significant involvement in the Jewish community and in the Federation. ADL did a lot of work with ADL, was on their board. So I think it may have started out of a sense of obligation, but then I got so into the work that they were doing, and it was very it was very satisfying for me. Thank you.
How do you think kind of the early involvement has kind of informed how your leadership and involvement has then progressed?
Well, that was the basis for everything.
Okay.
Yeah, that was sort of the beginning of the platform. I mean, there's nothing more satisfying than seeing the results of your work, or of your giving, or of your involvement with somebody. And that obviously came from my work that I did here and from my family's leadership and guidance in this. There's no question. It's interesting because my family's in the real estate development business, right? So people say, what do you like about real estate development? Well, it's different than other kinds of real estate because you can start a project and you can see, even the place that we're sitting in here today, the result of your work. And that's very satisfying. And that's the result of your work from your heart is incredible.
So when you were here in your kind of 20s, early 30s, and then you went to New York.
Uh-huh.
How did you get involved in New York, and how did you bring kind of your involvement here to?
So that's an interesting question, because I made a specific choice not to be involved in the Jewish Federation in New York, which brings me back to Omaha and to the differences of Omaha. Is in Omaha, we have such an intimate and close community, and we work so closely together. It's like working with family, and it's tangible. The work that we do is tangible here. In New York City, it's just a different kind of federation. It's more difficult to see and to feel and to be closely involved and touching the people that you're working with and wanting to help or grow with. It's so I chose not to be involved there. I was involved with the ADL there, and my greatest joy was when my dear friend Bob Wolfson, who was the head of ADL in the Plain States, moved to New York, and I continued to ride through the ADL journey with him. Doing that, but then it sort of got a little bit more global, so to speak, than my work was here. So a lot more stuff doing in Israel and bigger, more national kind of projects. But the offices or the core groups were in New York. So I sort of strayed away from the Federation and went into different kinds of projects that were maybe headquartered in New York, but not necessarily as huge as the Federation in New York.
So when you think about, your giving back, your involvement, your philanthropy, like, how do you think about it Jewishly versus like your secular involvement or your like advocacy involvement? Do you think about that?
So I don't differentiate, but I will tell you that I do believe that for me, my interest in giving back, in philanthropy, in working with others is 100% based in my Jewish values. But I don't necessarily sit down when somebody presents me with a project or a board or something and differentiate between whether or not it's a Jewish organization. I just don't. I think there's work to be done and help to be given all over the world. But I do believe it's all, for me, part of my Jewish value system.
Do you feel like you think about your philanthropy strategically? No?
I don't really think about anything strategically.
I'm sure that's not true. So then if you don't think about it strategically,
I'm more moved by my heart and my soul,
so
this kind of stuff.
So what inspires you? Like as you think about your current involvement or some past involvement, like what has been a project or what do you think kind of inspires you to want to get involved, to want to get?
Well, I think it is, that's a good question. I try to work on things that are very, probably these days more short-term, given the world that we live in right now. So maybe that's a little more strategic. Most interested in things that are more activist that I can have a hands on. I can't stand to sit on a board that just wants a check. I want to be involved in things. So, there are a couple different projects, some that are long-term projects, but I think right now it's things that are more urgent. And I'm not sure if this is answering your question, but it's, I'm not, and things that are tangible that I can see the work that's going on and be more intimately involved with are things that I am interested in right now.
That answers my question. Do you have an example you would share with us about maybe a time you've been really inspired and wanted to, either give or get involved?
Sure. Let's see. I suppose we can talk about what's gone on in the last year or so. I think there's been, I've come back around after, 20 years to share our strength and No Kid Hungry, because obviously the food insecurity is a huge issue. And I really had sort of, this is going to be a strange way of saying this, sort of felt like that was taken care of until it became a more urgent project. And so that's something we've been involved with. I have some best friends who have a foundation that is quite remarkable, called Circle of Generosity. And what they do is they grant basically random acts of kindness anonymously all over the world. And they've been very, very, very active during the pandemic. And I think that is one of the, I've been very lucky to be involved in that and help them find recipients in places we never would have thought about before. When the pandemic hit, I moved to my home in Long Island, and actually my friends called and said, we need to help some people. We need to do some things. So we actually called the synagogues out there and found some people that you never would have thought of in this area of the world really needing some help that got worse during the pandemic. So that is one of the most wonderful programs I've been involved with lately. So working on a great project in Israel, but I can't get to Israel, so that one's sort of on the back burner. But as soon as we can go, I'm out. Okay. Working on those two projects there.
Yeah,
so.
Thank you for sharing those examples.
Sure.
I want to talk for a minute from a female perspective on philanthropy and leadership, because sometimes people talk about women's philanthropy as a separate thing, or the importance behind kind of women getting together. So I want your perspective, maybe just your perspective on that first.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the things what you're sort of talking about are these women's giving circles, which I think are fantastic. Look, I'm not great at differentiating between men and women and giving. I think that if you are able to, and it's important to you that whomever you are, you carry some responsibility in making the world a better place. I mean, we should all practice tikkun olam, no matter whether we are a man or a woman. I do think that women have different interests than men. That one of the projects I'm talking about in Israel is a female-founded, female-run program for young women in Israel who've been sexually abused. And I'm not sure that project would have ever come to fruition if it weren't for the founder who shares the same story as these women. So, and I think we have different interests, but I think we all have responsibility, man or woman. But I'm thrilled to see high-profile women stepping up and really getting involved.
Do you feel like you've had any specific successes or challenges you have faced as a woman in kind of either a leadership space or a philanthropic space?
Well, certainly in business. Yes, I have grown up in a male-dominated business, so yes, there have been challenges. There has been harassment, all that kind of icky stuff. Philanthropically, no, I've never found that anybody would turn down time or money, whoever it comes from.
Okay, we are going to go to our second poll, and we are going to ask you guys a question that Jeff is going to pull up, and maybe he'll share what that question is.
I think it's shared. Sorry, they're doing some lawn work out here, and the leaf blower was right behind me. But we are interested in what folks are interested in outside the Jewish community. Where else? What other causes do you care about? And we're at about 10 of 18 votes. And a nice spread of interests. We'll show the results in just a second. The outlier being politics that no one seems to want to talk about. Someone here is interested in politics, and you and I can talk later.
But I'm going to ask Susie a question that's going to touch on politics because I don't remember. I'll just admit, my memory has been, the pandemic has caused problems with my, I think, long-term memory. But one thing I do remember when Susie was our teacher is that we got to go to Susie's parents' house, and it was 2000, so it was the 2000 election, and Joe Lieberman was running on the ticket, and he's obviously Jewish, and his wife Hadassah came to Omaha.
Yes, she did.
And I think was at a fundraiser at your parents' house, and
absolutely.
Our class got to go. And that was a formative experience for me, probably like my first political fundraiser. So I'm trying to think of the question I'm now going to ask you. But I think like as I think about that and kind of advocacy and political advocacy, do you feel like that's still part of your involvement in philanthropy and in terms of thinking about how maybe elected officials can help?
Oh, yeah. I still love a good lobby on Capitol Hill. Yes. And obviously, we've been living in such a politically charged environment for the last several years. Yes. And I do wish I were more involved with that. I have to tell you that a lot of that, my father was the one who really got me involved in Democratic politics. And I will say that since my father passed away, that has dwindled a bit. And I'm sorry for that. I would like to I would like to be more involved in that because I think it's more critical than ever.
Okay.
By the way, I just want to say one thing. There have been several people in my life that have given me this education and the gifts of the understanding of the right thing to do. And you should know that your father has been a great mentor, and your father has always pushed me and encouraged me to get involved and stay involved. And he has been a huge part of my life. And I probably don't tell him that enough. So I'm telling you, and you please tell him.
Thank you. I'll let him know. That's nice of you to say. Okay, so I'm going to ask the last question, and then we're going to go to the audience for questions. And so we kind of touch on this, but the last 14 months have been a huge world shift for all of us as we think about everything in our life, philanthropy, involvement, community. You've kind of touched on how you've been involved kind of in the last, during the pandemic with philanthropy. Like, as you think about going forward and involvement in your community, or your communities, Omaha, New York, what do you feel like is next, or what maybe takeaways do you have as we go back to this sense of normalcy?
Well, I hope that I don't forget the lessons and what I've learned during this. A lot of what I've worked on during this is very personal, a part of my journey. But I hope that that for me, I remember not to take all the things for granted that I took for granted, and remember, the people who have been there, who've supported me, who've surrounded me through this. Of course, the importance of family, and for someone like me, I think it was a good world shakeup to sort of. I thank God have been fine during all of this. Been healthy, been safe, been in a beautiful part of the world, in a beautiful home. But what I need to remember for myself is all the people that I don't want to forget about all the people that we don't think about every day. And I don't want to take any of these lessons for granted. So.
I want to end on a fun question,
Okay.
less serious.
Okay.
So you come back to Omaha a few times a year or more when it's not a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And you have two friends here who've never been here. So what's your favorite restaurant, bar, place you always go, or
we're sitting in it, the food hall. I come here for every meal.
Place you always go when you come back, or where you're gonna kind of show them this weekend.
Well, we started with the Old Market last night, and we're going to sort of, hit the highlights. I think we're going to see the museum. We're going to go to the zoo. We're going to see Lords and Gardens. And by the way, to some of your point, this is not stuff that I do when I'm home alone. When I'm home here, I'm either working or I'm running around and seeing my friends and my family, which, by the way, I will drag them to do today and tomorrow. I'm trying to think what is my first place to eat. Look, I have to be honest, like the Greek Isles, La Casa. I often take home a bag of La Casa pizzas, half baked. I take them home with me in a cooler for my other Omaha friends that are in New York. But I would say the most important thing is, not even the food. It's seeing people. This is what I stop by for, is to see as many people as I can and see my family that's not traveling, and check in. So
awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move to the next poll. I'm turning it back to Jeff.
Thank you. We have one more. We've learned a little bit about what inspires Susie, and we're curious for everyone here, what inspires you to give? What inspires you to be a part of this community and to give back?
Thank you. I cannot see it.
I think only I can see. It's such power while the results are coming in. And it seems like a lot of folks, I'll publish this in a second, I'll give everyone another moment to weigh in, but a lot of folks want to give out of a connection to the mission and the impact of the organization, which certainly seems related. Here, we'll share the results with everyone. Not that there's a bad answer. What's that, Al?
While you're sharing the results, we're gonna, if people have questions for Susie, you can either come off mute and ask your question, or you can just put it in the chat. So this is your time to ask questions.
I'll start out with one that we have. What is the most important leadership lesson that you have learned along the way through all of the experiences that you've talked about today?
Wow. Listening to those around you, sharing your stories, sharing, which I'm not great at doing, but I think it's really important when you're working with others. And I do think that the most important, though, is listening and listening to the stories of others. It can really help you. Sometimes I think when we get into working with big organizations, the people that we're working for are so, quote, far away from us that you can lose sight of what you're working on or who you're working for. And I think being closely involved and listening to that is really important.
That's awesome. Thank you. It's breaking up a little for me. I don't know if that's on my end or your end.
Any other questions from the audience? People feel free to put them into the chat. I'll ask another one of Susie. So we're all in our 30s or 40s mostly. What's your advice to this, us, when we're in this age and we're thinking about how we can be involved or give back? And we're all busy too, right? A lot of us have young kids, and
even do what you can, even the smallest bit of it, and it doesn't have to be 24/7, and it doesn't have to be every day. But just by virtue of the fact that you guys are all here and on this call shows that you're interested in the community and you're interested in being involved. But you don't have to do it all now. You don't have to do it all in your 30s and 40s. You got a long journey ahead of you, and do what you can.
Okay, I'm going to do one last call for questions.
I have a question.
Oh, Ellie. Yes, Ellie.
So I'm apparently one of several New Yorkers on the call today. And you've talked a lot about your connection to Omaha and how strong that remains throughout your years in New York. But I'm wondering because I get asked this question all the time too, what about your kind of New York perspective do you bring back to the Omaha community? And is there anything that kind of, you consider as a New York influence in your philanthropy or other work that you continue to do?
Well, that's interesting. That's a really interesting question. I've never ever thought of it that way. New York is a really different place than Omaha. By the way, do you want some La Casa pizza? Because I'll bring you some back if you want.
She's
some.
here now.
Oh, she's here.
Ellie lived in Brooklyn for a while, but was born in
Westchester. You can get your own.
Yeah.
You can get your own La Casa pizza. Okay.
But my uncle might take you up on that.
Okay. Look, this is not something that I think about consciously, but we are all a product of our environment and our lessons and our journey. And certainly living in New York for all these years is different than living here. But I can't pinpoint anything specifically. All I can say is that I hope whatever part of my life has been in New York and whatever I've learned and soaked up in New York is good and goodness that I bring back here with me on the days that I'm here. I'm sure there's a heightened awareness to certain things. I know in business that there's been a lot of lessons that I've learned in learned in business in New York and outside of Omaha that I think have been a benefit in the work that we do. But I don't know that I can pinpoint anything specifically other than I just think we're certainly for me, I'm just a whole mix of this great journey that I'm on, and whatever I've picked up from there and bring from here, it's kind of all part of it.
Thanks, Ellie. Any other questions? All right, friends. So I'm going to quickly bring myself on the screen and say thank you again for joining us. And I also, before we go, so part of this year's BGS plan was we were going to do 3 virtual events, and then we're going to come back together in person. So I'm going to share a screen that highlights the impact that our community has made in this year's annual campaign. This year, thanks to great leadership, we raised the largest amount of money ever in our annual campaign. We raised over $3.5 million. Wow. And of that $3.5 million, I'm really proud. Hold on. The computer is not my friend. To say that we, as a community of under 45, had 177 donors raising almost $75,000. Wow.
Good for you guys.
So while there's still room to grow, and we have years in which we will hopefully step into the philanthropy of those who came before us, and we can keep that 3.5 million strong because of our ties and our giving, we have a very strong foundation. And on top of that, this year's kids campaign, so for those of you guys who have kiddos, we had 90 donors who raised over $850, $863. I think one of the things about Omaha that is amazing is that we teach this lesson so early. As Susie said, it was something that was always there. And I think these 90 young children are a prime and shining example of that. And the other amazing part of Omaha is the wonderful history that we have as a community, and that we're 150 years strong. And some of that history has taken place at a building that is now been renovated and is going to be the site of this summer's back in-person Young Leadership Gala on August 29th in the afternoon. We are excited to plan forward a poolside cocktail party at the Cottonwood Hotel that was once the Blackstone. And so many of us have grandparents who had weddings there. There are stories of late night poker games there. And so we are excited to bring together and celebrate this year's Young JFO leaders and all of you as we kick off next year's campaign as a young community together. So in ending, we have one last poll that I'm going to ask Jeff to share, which is really, what is it about Jewish community that you connect with? Because we want to make sure that as we build out and strengthen this community, we make it what reflects you. Because we are the inheritors of this amazing community, and thusly we have a responsibility to step forward and make sure that we make it better for those who came before us, the way that our parents and Susie, one of my favorite Hebrew school teachers, did for us.
One who doesn't speak Hebrew.
We can get into a very long conversation. I think value, there are many parts of identity, and as long as one of them or two of them is strong, that's all that matters. So it looks like no shocker in this poll, involvement is really what drives our community. So as we come back together, I really can't wait to see your faces and get us more involved. And I know that our boards will be super excited to hear that the next generation wants to get involved.
So thank you so much for joining us this morning. We'll follow up with a survey again, and we look forward to seeing you on August 29th. Again, thank you to Allie and Susie and Jeff and Justin and Lissy. This year would not have happened without your involvement and leadership. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.